Hello everyone, it's Glenn with Two Ends doing another video on a theory that I think is a bit crazy, and I don't think it's I don't think it's particularly correct, and it might be completely wrong. But I wanted to put it out there just so people can think about it and give some feedback. So it's a bit of a fun idea that I put some effort into the concepts. So a dolmen is a megalithic structure. Here's a typical one. It has a big lump slab at the top where the I suppose the orientation of this sediment is horizontal, and then you've got vertical slabs positioned, usually two, sometimes three. That's your typical one. The dolmens have been around for a long time. So late Neolithic, so 4,000 to 3,000 BC, some of them a bit later. The purpose remains unclear. They could be tombs, but they might not be. There's not been a lot of evidence. The Ancient Origins website's always a good website to get some basic information. I like to go here now and again, and it also refers to them as dolmens or cromlechs. Yes, from the period 3000 to 4000 BC. They're a bit of a mystery, they say, and they're quite common. Most of them are concentrated in Korea, the dolmens. Most of them are in Korea, of all places, and they're very close to each other, though we do get quite a few in the Middle East, obviously, and where we get a lot of everything, of course, and strangely we get it, not strangely, but quite typically we get a lot of dolmens in France and UK, of course, and most definitely Spain. So the geographical distribution is mainly Western Europe and Korea, of all places. So that's something to think about when you're trying to work out about the diffusion of dolmens and perhaps who made them and what is their cultural backdrop. Okay, the etymology of dolmens is just quite interesting. I mean, there's cromlechs, there's various other names meaning stone table, but the Irish Gaelic is probably the most interesting, being Dolmen. So Dolmen, as in it's almost domain or a location. We know with the internet, a domain is like a location or a reference point, or sometimes it's a static IP address or something like that. It's something you can reference, and you can house a part of the network. So that's interesting as well. Possibly one of the most interesting parts of dolmens in Spain is that apparently the Gentiles, the Gentles, or the Gentilacs, where the word Gentile apparently comes from, are these big hairy guys, giants, hairy, just like a Sasquatch, big hairy people. I mean, it's basically the same as a Sasquatch. Apparently they built them, and they were also the ones that invented metallurgy and taught the locals all sorts of things. Funny enough, you'll get in the Book of Enoch, you'll get the story of the fallen ones teaching people the arts of various crafts and various skills and that kind of thing. And so we get this kind of crossover narrative. So we have this, what they claim, and this is their source, is that the giants in Basque mythology, at least, were the ones that built the dolmens. And since we don't have any contiguous understanding of dolmens, we don't know what they're for, because the legends of them were not passed down from whoever made them to the Celtic peoples and all the Copper Age peoples, and so the knowledge of the dolmens and their purpose wasn't passed down, and hence, of course, it's most likely a different people that has gone into the background that made them and didn't pass down the legacy. It's not contiguous. If you go back to the material, most dolmens, if not all of them, are made of granite. I don't know if they were cut and lifted or they were cast and then positioned. And there are articles on how the things were made. Basically, I think there is. But either way, you have basically a slab of granite that's horizontal, so that the the actual grain of the stone is horizontal, and then you got at least two, sometimes three, sometimes four, sometimes many slabs that are vertical. Granite has piezoelectric properties, and so you can just look it up yourself. Basically, piezoelectric properties means is that here's just a general spread of images basically related to the subject, but if pressure is put on the material, then it changes the polarity, or it creates an electric effect, a mechanical electrical effect. So electricity is caused by the pressure put on the material. And of course, there are articles on how stone can be fatigued. Granite contains quartz, and quartz is an ideal material for piezoelectric effect. And of course, when you go back to here, you can see the obvious thing that I thought about is that you've got a massive stone at the top. That's a huge amount of weight that's going to create an enormous piezoelectric effect on the stones below. This is assuming that the stones have not had pressure on previously, or they're new stones with freshly created geopolymer slabs. So you've got no fatigue within the stone, and you're going to get a fresh piezoelectric effect. So I can't imagine it working now, but 4,000 or 6,000 years ago, I'm sure that the environment would have been different, and the stones would have been fresh, and they would have created a strong piezoelectric effect straight away. And I've often thought about this, is that what would that mean in the structure of a dolmen? So I don't know where to begin. It's just crazy. But look, there's a good website. Why do I think it could be a radio? Now, back in Neolithic times, there was no electromagnetic background radiation. No one was creating radio. No one was creating electricity. There was only the background radiation of the earth and the lightning and the basic background electromagnetic fields that you would have in the Stone Age, which means there was not hardly any white noise, I'd imagine. Now, this is a good site, how stuff works, radios, the basics of radios and how you're going to deal with frequencies. So a typical radio, you can make typical radios yourself just by using a battery and just creating a square wave, basically turning the battery on and off. It goes on and on. But basically the radio that we use today is that we have a huge aerial, we receive an enormous number of signals, and we have to use a few componentry to filter out the signals, get one signal, and then we have to modulate the signal with a crystal, and then amplify it and then listen to it. And that's the basics of what we need. So the most basic radio is a crystal radio, and the crystal radio used to use what was called a piece of coke or some other basic diode, which prevented the signal going backwards and forwards. It made the signal go in one direction. And it used a tuner and a couple other components to weed out the various signals from all the stations, and just to focus on one at a time. Now, back in the and of course I had a simple speaker. And speakers are actually piezoelectric devices in crystal radios. They use a metal plate over a small bit of electromagnetic coil or something. It's something like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, most crystal radio speakers are piezoelectric speakers, just as a point of reference. And the simplest radio, if you look at this diagram here on the left, you've got basically a diode, which is basically a crystal essentially, and you've got a wire on each side. One wire goes as the antenna, and the other one goes to ground. And then you listen to it through a set of headphones. And of course, the antenna, and it says here that the simplest radio would need to be 1 mile from the transmitting station. This is something to keep in mind, because dolmens are in multitudes and they are roughly a few miles apart. And so they are in close proximity and they have high concentration, so that if they were a radio, they could transmit and receive most likely easily to each other. But how would the signal work? And so let's just remember that diagram. There's an antenna, it goes to a crystal and goes down to ground. So I'm just going to draw a bit of a diagram here. Okay, so what do I think about dolmen? So okay, so that's one of the supports. That's the big whopping thing at the top, and here's the other support. That's the Earth. Okay, so the grains of the stone go up and down on the struts, and so you got a huge amount of pressure coming down, creating a piezoelectric effect. I don't know exactly how to work. Problem is that it's grounded on both sides, so obviously any charge would just go straight to ground. And this stone is orientated crossways, and so it's similar to the whole thing could be considered something similar to what's called a transistor. Anyone who studies electronics will know that there's such a thing as a transistor. Is basically either there's two kinds of transistors, but basically they're made up of three parts. There's three crystals that have got some kind of break in between, but basically you got a crystal of type, say, N. There's two crystals of type N, and the center one is type P. I don't want to get into details, but basically you have a voltage that goes in here and comes out here, or vice versa, and then this is called the base, right? And if you can somehow manipulate the energy going to the base, then certain amounts of current will cross over the crystals on the other side. And this inspired me to think that the dolmen is one enormous transistor. The only problem is that the current's only going to go to Earth, and the whole thing probably won't work. However, and Earth is hot, particularly in France, the Earth is going to be highly conductive because of the amount of moisture in the soil. Be that as it may, you got a big whopping stone on the top. So what I'm thinking is going to happen is that if you were to use a whopping massive club and you were to strike this center stone, you could incite more of a piezoelectric effect by striking the thing on the top. By striking the thing, obviously it would create an echo and you could hear it across the valley, so that's probably one interesting facet. But the other thing is that it would probably excite striking rock also creates electric effects. So what could possibly happen then is that you'll create a bridge, and potentially a certain amount of charge could go across. And then since the whole thing is quite large, it might actually create a transmission, albeit subtle. Now, another dolmen located a couple miles away would not be struck. They might, for example, stick a copper wire, and they see holes in dolmens. Dolmens have mysterious holes in some of them, as if no one knows what they're there for. So that you could probably put a copper rod. They would have had them in the late Stone Age. They did. That's what the late Stone Age is using copper anyway. So most likely what happened is that they could have put some kind of divining rod, so to speak, and that could have potentially resonated as a receiver channel, and it would have picked up potentially subtle vibrations from a distance, so they could possibly pick up. So if you're striking it with a certain, like, Morse code, it could possibly be received. Now, this is just a crazy potential idea, and an electronics engineer might say it's garbage, and I totally accept it. And like, this is totally hyper theoretical, and we couldn't replicate it today because there's too much background noise, and we'd have to get properly doped stone, and it'd be quite challenging. But who knows? And I'm not saying all dolmens were like this. Just going on the striking thing, the Ogham script is a Pictish Celtic script from the early Middle Ages, which is based on strikes, which is obviously similar to the string code of Central America and South America, and it may have nothing to do with dolmens, but it's just an interesting, like, pre-Morse code thing where you could potentially have some kind of early form of communication by the number of strikes relating to a symbol or some kind of meaning. Ogham is, funny enough, almost the same pronunciation as Ohm, which is the chant, the meditation chant, and it's also the unit of resistance, which is ohms is the unit of resistance. And I sometimes wonder if our modern electronics is ultimately derived from ancient knowledge that was more advanced than the people the Neolithic and with more advanced technologies from a parallel culture working beside us. Just a rough idea there. One last idea I had about dolmens is that some of the dolmens are actually encased as a full structure and have a circle in the middle. And these circles can be like 18 inches wide, or even maybe even less, and they're quite well cut. And I often thought that, and I thought I read somewhere, heard somewhere that but a metal disc went in that hole. Now I can't remember that site, or maybe I just thought I remembered it. It was an idea that came across when I was obviously researching something. There is the Nebraska sky disc, which is the famous disc here, which is roughly 30 centimeters wide, which could sit in there, perhaps. But generally there are stone plugs that go in there. But I at one point I thought that perhaps a metal plate could go in there, and that could act as a piezoelectric speaker, and the whole thing is basically a giant speaker box, and that the pressure on the stones would resonate. But when I think about going through it, I don't think that would work, because I think that the stones won't create that effect, because there's not going to be enough pressure, and the pressure is not going to be distributed in such a manner, and you won't be able to create that bridge. So I think that theory that I had briefly was wrong, but I thought I'd mention it just to go through the complete mental process I went through to come up with the ideas I did. I think that these dolmens were made for, I'm not sure. So I don't think they're tombs. One of the people from Mudflood, Kaz Maynard, suggested that the dolmens were used for ceremonial purposes, with the deceased bodies placed on top in some kind of pyre, perhaps. So that's just another theory there that we had. Anyway, so just recapping, going on what I think the circuit is that it's probably it could possibly be a giant transistor. However, it's anchored into the ground, which kind of means that it possibly won't work anyway. But even if they did work as a giant transistor, where this top slab actually acted as an aerial that emanated to another dolmen that received it, and then that dolmen could then act as a transmitter, and that could receive it, and there was no background radio energy anyway, so you had no noise, so you didn't have any interference. The other thing is that they're both dolmens, so all dolmens are dolmens, which means they're basically tuned to connect with each other because they're made out of the same materials. You don't need a tuning device. You don't need coils. You don't need other things, because they're basically the same thing talking to the same thing. So like for like, and so so one would emanate a signal that could be then received by something of the same structure, and so dolmens to dolmen communication would make sense in that sense. If they could create enough charge to go through the distance, they probably could by striking it with a club. So any engineers out there want to come up and tell me that's wrong, that's great. I'm fine with that. I just wanted to get off my chest. And that's it. Hopefully I covered it all. Thank you.